One thing that's amazing about Halo is the fact that the speedrunning community has existed for so many years, and we can look back at essentially 2 decades worth of players exploring and discovering new methods and tricks that could essentially change the way a game is played. And it's really awesome whenever one massive trick changes the way that essentially all speedrunners end up playing the Halo games because of such a substantial discovery. So today we wanted to take a look back at the biggest discoveries from Halo speedrunning that changed the way that these games were played. But first, this video is sponsored by none other than Vite Ramen. Did you know that Vite Ramen not only tastes good, but the team behind the product has done some really awesome things for the gaming community as a whole? The team at Vite Ramen is also introducing a free shipping set, so that makes the buy-in lower now to get your Vite Ramen. And of course, the Vite Ramen team is really passionate about what they are doing. Vite Ramen CEO Tim has a Michelin star cooking experience that he relies on to help craft the flavors that make Vite Ramen awesome. In other words, it's the equivalent of having like a high ELO, but for ramen. And now when you order through our link, you get access to exclusive bundles, and with code ROCKETSLOTH, you can save an additional 10% at checkout, and of course, you support us directly as well. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into this. Now, mind you, there is an extensive history of Halo speedrunning, and doing research on these topics is a little bit tricky because not only is documentation of some of these tricks originated in conversations or forum posts, and then other players would recreate the tricks for their own runs, but also the explanation of how some of these tricks are executed might be very, very surface level because some of them are much more in-depth and specific than we'll cover in this video. We will link some great resources though if you're wanting to learn how to pull off some of these tricks on your own in the description. On the level Assault on the Control Room, there is one of the oldest out-of-the-map glitches known to the Halo community, which is the original bridge skip, which really isn't an out-of-the-map glitch. You're really just bypassing the level in a way you're not intended to, but essentially players found that if they line themselves up just perfectly, you can in fact survive the free fall off of the bridge on Assault on the Control Room. This originally was discovered pretty much immediately after Halo Combat Evolved's release, at least as a co-op trick, as it's much easier to pull off in co-op, but over time players started playing around with this and it began circulating online that you could in fact survive the bridge fall solo. Once again, once you make it to the bottom, there's no enemies for the rest of the level, making completing this level so much easier. Now, this trick actually did end up becoming outdated eventually, but in a way its spirit lives on. Instead of jumping off the bridge like the trick originally entailed, nowadays players bait a Banshee into coming towards the player, and then if you step backwards at the right time, it forces an elite to jump out of the Banshee for whatever reason, and then a player can jump in the Banshee. Remember, Combat Evolved didn't have hijacking, so this extra step is a big deal, and while this is a new trick, it still in a way is kind of like the sequel to the old trick, since it's done in the same exact location, and it does do the same effects that the old version did, except this time you have a Banshee, which is way faster and cooler. There also were some really interesting discoveries when Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary released in 2011. Now, prior to Combat Evolved Anniversary, you could break out of various maps, and really you would just see the void because the map wasn't loaded in. However, with the way that Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary is built, all of the game's textures are loaded in at the beginning in Anniversary graphics, despite where you are in your loading sequence. Even if the geometry itself isn't loaded in, you can still see where in the world you would be if Halo Combat Evolved was capable of loading the entire game. And over the years, the fact that they added this to Combat Evolved Anniversary, and that would also be present in the Master Chief Collection, players have been able to utilize the Anniversary graphics to map out specific directions out of bounds to load in the levels in the sequential order needed to complete the level, while also bypassing massive parts of the levels as well. This is really common now on 2 Betrayals, and I'll be honest, I haven't pulled this one off myself, so my explanation might not be the most accurate, but here's the basic idea of what speedrunners do. Actually, the YouTuber Special Agent Speedrunner has a really simple guide that breaks it down how to perform it, but essentially you want to get the Banshee in this hallway on 2 Betrayals, you want to go and hit the little beam thing, then then go back and grab a new Banshee that spawns and bring that one into the hallway as well. They then do some camera tricks, making sure that the Banshee's reticle is lined up with the wall correctly. It's a little confusing. And then they turn their Banshee up and it launches the player through the ceiling. Then they have to land specifically on a glass pane, and then from there they have to do some parkour based on objects you may or may not see with some very specific landing tricks. And then they use the new graphics to line up on the ledge that they have to walk over and eventually make their way to the Banshee, where they can then board the Banshee through the wall into the void. But using the new graphics, you can actually see where you are, which is a good guidance to make sure you're hitting the level in sequential order. From there are specific nuances and routes that you need to follow to make sure that you're not going to soft lock your way through, but it is a pretty massive way to save time on tuba trails, and also it could help if you're a lasso runner as well. On Truth and Reconciliation, there is a way you can bypass the main belly firefight section by going out of bounds and traversing the geometry with a trick that is known as the belly skip. It typically is done over by this wraith here, and it's probably one of the most precise tricks that, to be fair, I'm a little nervous trying to explain because it's just beyond my own comprehension, and speedrunners who can pull this trick off are just incredibly impressive to me. So from my understanding, essentially what you have to do is line yourself up by the wing of the wraith and shoot at it a couple of times so that the overall health of the wraith is lowered. Then you time a sticky grenade explosion somehow, which then, if you're holding your movement the right way and looking in the right direction, you can partially clip into the wraith, and then it seems like there's a pressure bump once you release your movement that will then fling you up into the sky, where you have to land on an invisible platform. And then from there you can utilize the anniversary graphics to see where you're going and navigate to the next loading zone, bypassing this entire section. However, there's other versions of this trick and approaches to bypassing this room. Some runners are able to do a version of the belly skip without even using Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary graphics. To this day, belly skip has been one of the biggest skips used in Halo Combat Evolved speedrunning, as it is such a massive time saver, but it also is one of the more challenging tricks to pull off in all of Halo speedrunning, making the entry level for newer runners a little bit harder because they have to essentially learn this trick, though with enough practice and loading a checkpoint so you can continue to revert and line yourself up until it's muscle memory, you probably could eventually get this trick down. Similarly, after Halo 2 Anniversary released, players did have some fun looking at the out of bounds section, as similar to Combat Evolved Anniversary, now all of the textures were loaded in, and of course the end of the level is just right down below the starting area on Halo 2's High Charity. If only there was a way to get down there without dying, that would be neat. Well, eventually there was the discovery that by convincing this little flood guy to be your transportation method, you can do a trick very similar to a butterfly trick and continuously lunge yourself up onto the enemy, and you can essentially glide your way by continuously doing this over to the end of the level, which is an instant sequence that will cut straight to the cutscene, thus finishing the level immediately, which isn't the case in too many Halo levels across the board. Once again, this was a trick that I did try to learn at one point for our Halo 2 Legendary Under 3 Hours run and also our Lasso run, and I could never actually pull it off, but it still is really cool to see these speedrunners who are able to perfectly time their button presses doing this melee type canceling thing, and then also maneuver themselves and get into a rhythm where they feel like they can steer where they're going, and that in itself is really awesome. Similarly, Uprising also has a end trigger much like High Charity, where you just have to get to a certain point and stand on it and it ends the level. So that also was a pretty big discovery, though it wasn't as complicated or significant in the same sense as how the High Charity discovery was. There's other tricks that have evolved over the years when it comes to Halo Combat Evolved speedrunning, different versions of bumping to get through platforms or different sections of the level that you're not supposed to be able to get to right away, whether it's tricks like flood bumping on keys or even using a shield to bump through with precise standing. These are also really interesting tricks that have existed for quite some time that had become main strategies, even though they were deemed too challenging at the beginning. It's always really interesting to see the reaction to these tricks from players who don't really understand what's going on. It's even more interesting when some of the developers who actually worked on Halo Combat Evolved did a video watching a speedrun done, and the confusion but amusement is really funny.
If there's
And then he's using the physics from this guy to pop him through. Oh my gosh.
Sweet. That's a good move.
And then he's going to jump. No, he's not jumping yet. Wait, is he never going to jump into the goo?
Wait, these guys are brain dead.
They're all deactivated. What happened?
Whoever scripted this really failed at scripting.
Back when Halo 2 first released, all types of little glitches and tricks were definitely discovered by the community. But one of the most popular and famous tricks that ended up becoming not only synonymous almost with regular Halo 2, but definitely a key part in Halo 2 speedrunning was sword lunging and sword flying. Not only is this trick really cool, where it involves you zooming in, locking on to some sort of enemy, swinging your sword at the right perfect timing, and just flying across the map, and that's just a simplified explanation of how to do that. This trick was really popular all the way back in 2004, and it remains popular to this day, and it's kind of in general one of those iconic and most recognizable speedrunning tricks across the entire speedrunning community beyond just Halo. A lot of people know about sword flying in Halo 2, they just go hand in hand. Another really big discovery comes in the form of Halo 2's Gravemind. Now typically in this level you have to go down this elevator and fight all of these jackals and some other enemies, then you have to go free some marine buddies that are locked up, fight some more brutes and stuff, make your way back up. It's a whole ordeal. But back in 2015, long-term Halo 2 speedrunner Mr. Monopoly found a strategy where if you bait the brute into the grav lift and then you bash the brute and cancel and do this type of melee canceling strategy, you can actually put the brute back up right at this right loading sequence and use the brute to levitate yourself upwards just high enough where the elevator will pick Master Chief back up and push him into the next loading zone, skipping the entire prison. It's a pretty tricky maneuver to pull off, especially on harder difficulties, but it is a massive sectional save and it became commonplace in Halo 2 speedrunning. Halo 3 is a very interesting speedrunning game because for the most part, the tricks and strategies that are utilized in Halo 3 running just differ significantly from the types of tricks we see in Halo 1 and Halo 2, even other games too, down the road. Halo 3, for the most part, is pretty tight and linear in the way that speedrunners approach many of the levels, so there aren't as many massive skips throughout, but the ones that do exist are incredibly interesting. For instance, on the Storm, the level where you typically have to spend quite some time fighting a scarab has had its time reduced significantly, as over the years, players have evolved different strategies to bypass the big scarab battle. Originally, there were test strategies that were presented where some runners would try to find ways to overload Halo 3, making the game lag, like hijacking an AA Wraith and then getting stepped on. The game lagging so badly would end up causing the scarab to despawn, bypassing the section, and while this trick ended up getting changed and refined over the years, it did show that this could in fact be a viable time save if there's a better way to get past the scarab without having to fight it. The level can be continued without a scarab battle and finished, so it was just a matter of time before players found a way around it. Some of the more advanced Halo 3 strategies involve utilizing a deployable cover to help clip through surfaces or even to launch the player along at a faster speed, saving time, and this was a strategy that was also used to try to bypass the scarab as well. However, the main strategy that ended up getting discovered and used in most runs now to bypass the scarab is actually to take a mongoose, drive it into this room, push it past a barrier, and then line it up perfectly with the door, and you can do a wall clip just like that and make your way to the next section, not even having to fight the scarab in the first place. We talked a little bit about the ideas of DC launching, but in Halo 3, DC launching became a strategy utilized in many different instances, and it's kind of interesting how effective this can be and how much of a time save that can be had here. There's some pretty cool launches you can do with the deployable covers on the level levels the Storm and on the Covenant. Now, these are sometimes a little bit riskier moves, especially if it could cost you the game if you fly off in the wrong direction, but it still is really awesome to see a speedrunner who has practiced the trick many different times and then they're actually able to go ahead and pull it off. Ever since Halo 3 ODST released in 2009, speedrunners have been finding different little ways over the years to make the game shorter and progress along as quickly as possible. There were some interesting discoveries made early on, like when you're on Mombasa streets, you go to Oni Alpha site before you go to Kazingo Boulevard. You could save some time in travel, or even some of the really awesome pressure boosts that are used in Teari Plaza to move along quicker. And while a lot of the levels in Halo 3 ODST were optimized and had little tricks found for them, one level did not have any speedrun tricks for the longest time. Coastal Highway. More or less, this level had the reputation of not only being the longest level in Halo 3 ODST, but being pretty locked as far as limitations went when speedrunning through this level. For the most part, you just had to kind of move up, wait for the gate to open, and move up some more, making this one of the few levels that didn't have any massive tricks associated with it. However, in late 2020, it was finally discovered that there is in fact a way to bypass and speed through Coastal Highway if you can hit all of the gate sequences in order. Now, ODST is really interesting because already in a couple of different places, there are certain glitches you could do utilizing vehicles to bring your character out of the barrier that is set up for a player, but Coastal Highway definitely brought it to another level. Speedrunners found out if they knocked a Warthog out of bounds here, and then also set them up with a second Warthog out of bounds that they could then actually use after using the first Warthog to break through the barrier. If they drove the Warthog in a very specific route, driving through the middle of some of the tops of the tunnel entrances, and then around some of the other tunnel entrances, and went in a very specific route, they could force the game to load along in the correct order that is supposed to be loaded in without having to wait the long amounts of times for Dare to move the dump truck up. This trick was not only revolutionary because it saved a ton of time in Halo 3 ODST speedrunning, but also this was one of the levels that didn't have any major tricks associated with it for over 10 years before this was found. This trick is really challenging to pull off because you do have to do some studying ahead of time and learn what you're supposed to do at each checkpoint, or else it will force all of the players inside of the tunnel, thus killing the trick. But it's really satisfying once you learn how to do the trick itself. Now, if you guys remember a couple of weeks ago, we went after a ton of acrophobia categories that hadn't been claimed in Halo runs, and we took the world record in Halo 3 ODST because no one else had it yet. Shortly after that, some runners came and they beat our score by about 10 minutes, and we decided to go and relearn some of these harder tricks to see if we could improve our time. And Coastal Highways out of bounds was one of those tricks that I ended up learning and memorizing the complete route, which then resulted in us beating their time by about 7 minutes, taking the world record back for a few days before a team of actual really pro speedrunners came and cut our time by about 9 minutes. Still, the learning process of this trick was really awesome and also incredibly frustrating when you're not knowing what you're doing wrong and you end up losing all of the progress you made. Essentially, when we were doing this trick with acrophobia for our acrophobia speedruns, we had to have one player perfectly launch the Warthog out of bounds, which in itself takes some precision, as there's this little window where you can actually get the Warthog out of bounds and it will land in a place where a player can access it. And then from there, it seemed almost hit or miss whether or not the Warthog would actually let us clip through the barrier. We still hadn't fully figured out the logistics of what allows consistently a player to clip through the barrier. It seems like our understanding is that there's something with the game traits carrying the vehicle over to the player in a certain instance that lets us clip through, and it's a lot more complicated than just a standard elastic barrier, but we're still not 100% sure how everything works, and it looks like there's two different barriers, one soft one and one hard one set up here. However, once we can get through, we do have the benefit of playing with acrophobia, so we didn't need to launch a second Warthog to drive through all the loading sequences, and from there I had to learn which type of approach to use on each loading sequence because they are kind of a lot of the time different. Just to summarize it real quick, going through Coastal Highway, gates 1 and 2 are pretty basic. You just have to make sure you fly through the middle. But gate 3 is a little bit different. I just stand in this specific corner, which is very similar to a place you're supposed to stand in some other gates later on, but not the same. So if you're not standing right here, it could mess up, and then you teleport inside and the whole thing's ruined. Gate 4 was the same as gates 1 and 2, but gate 5, these banshees come and they can splatter you, so you just have to be careful. I also learned this is a good place to force a checkpoint. Gate 6 is where the scarab comes, and I had to hit 2 loading sequences on this one to make sure that the tank actually spawns inside of the level, and then I did this little trick where you have to line yourself up with this line and walk along it like a tightrope. The next gate is a lot like that one gate where I was like, it's similar to other gates later on, but not quite. And this one, I literally still don't fully understand it because I mess up on this one more than any other one. But if you inch your way slowly directly into this line, it loads the sequence in and you could move forward. You have to then glide around this upper thing and you go over here and you do another very similar type of load like the previous one, but it's slightly more sensitive. Then you move ahead, you hit another load just like this, and then the last load you can fly through like normal, make your way into the tunnel, and you should hear dialogue like Buck talking about moving into the next area and clearing the sector out. It is funny, Buck, Dare, and Virgil will eventually load in with you, and while this is all happening, you can still see the scarab that normally destroys the elephant just chilling there. And also, when you're doing this trick, you have to be sure to know where all of the regular loading zones are beyond just these tunnel zones, because if you end up missing them, you can run into an instance where the next part of the level won't load, and then Dare will just drive off into the void with Virgil and die, which also happened to us a couple of times. Yeah, I mostly learned how to do this trick by watching speedrunners Rylum and Hark the Shark do this, and then practicing a lot. But still, this is probably my favorite speedrun trick in this entire video, just because it's very, very step oriented, but also really satisfying if you can pull it off, because the time save is really significant here. You could easily shave off about 10 minutes on an average level play of this, and that's really cool, or at least I thought it was. This next one's really interesting because not only was it a more recent discovery when Halo was coming to PC, but it also had implications for different Halo games across the board on how players could save time. Known as the Slinky Flip, it's a trick you do in a Banshee where you use your mouse to quickly turn and roll to move in the direction that you want to move. And essentially, this was discovered by a user named Slinky who just randomly showed up in a Halo Runs discussion and suggested this trick. And while they didn't have any record of running Halo really, it turned out to be something that did work, but not just in one Halo game like Halo 3 or Reach. It's one that consistently can work in different instances across the board with the Halo games where you can control the flipping. For instance, in the recent Kikowani world record in Halo 3 ODST, you can see Binails using this trick right here. Back in 2016, speedrunner Jangoose began working on an updated and more viable path on winter contingency in Halo Reach for the Falcon skip, where he found that if he loaded a previous area and then reloaded the next loading section again, the outpost would end up having the entire door closing process skipped. And later on, speedrunners Pedrogas, Backflip, Halo Dude, and Wolfie ended up testing this method and played around with it more, looking for more viable options. They even found a better load zone that could be hit to get better timings, which let you skip the wave fighting entirely. Halo 4 is known for having this really long sequence in the first level, Dawn. However, back in around 2016, there was a trick for co-op mode where you could do a triple head stack and glitch out of the map, therefore bypassing the back section of Dawn and beating the level early. However, in 2019, speedrunner Royal Hobo made a big discovery, putting together a solo method for completing Dawn using this method to get out of bounds and bypass the main level. I think Halo 5 Guardians is really interesting when it comes to speedrunning, and in a way, I kind of want to do more research on Halo 5 as a whole as time progresses on when it comes to the speedrunning side of things. There's a lot of really interesting and nuanced tricks that you can do in Halo 5 that are unlike anything you can do in any of the other Halo games. And I mean, even if you don't like Halo 5, there's now methods out there to complete Halo 5 in the least amount of time having to play Halo 5 possible. Though, along the way of doing research research for this video, I found myself really intrigued and interested in what's going on in a lot of the strategies for Halo 5 Guardians, just because of the fact that it's kind of cracking open some mythology that isn't so commonplace across speedrunning. Renegade 15, Renegade XV, I think it's 15, has actually put a ton of time into speedrunning Halo 5 over the years, and not only has had some really awesome runs on his own channel, but also has put some pretty cool guides that highlight some of the simpler strategies to the more convoluted tricks that are performed in Halo 5 Guardians speedruns. Firstly, thrust sliding seems to be a big part of the run, which utilizes the advanced movement introduced in Halo 5, but the fastest way to get around is typically maneuvering while sprinting, then thrusting, then sliding and jumping in that order to keep the most momentum up as possible. And honestly, if you just look through some of the Halo 5 trick sets that are used, it's really interesting. There's things like turret launches to other types of things to manage to clip through doors and just beating the levels in a really interesting way by manipulating a lot of the loading sequences. Now, interestingly enough, Halo 5 Guardians does share a lot in common when it comes to speedrunning with Halo Infinite. Now, Halo Infinite has an interesting track history, to say the least. There were a ton of really amazing speedrunning tricks found during the earliest days of Halo Infinite since its release, and these tricks were run by the community, and the entire game was beatable in something like 30 minutes or even less than that, I think. However, 343 did a patch which closed off a lot of the different speedrunning tricks that were capable during the first season of Halo Infinite, and some of the glitches remained, but a lot of them ended up getting nerfed out of existence, which means that players have had to reevaluate Halo Infinite to come up with new routes for speedrunning and new tricks that I guess fall under the status of legal when it comes to Halo Infinite's campaign. It's really a weird issue to run into. A lot of games have this come up where a game has glitches that are utilized in a speedrun, and then a patch happens and players sometimes stay on the old patch and run that, and then some players stay on the new patch. A while back though, we did do a video on how players did originally beat Halo Infinite in just 30 minutes, though of course a lot of those are now patched out. Now, there is still the tank gun that you can get that shoots tank bullets out of your feet, but there are now different ways that the game is run, all things considered. So from tricks like being able to fly the Halo Infinite Pelican by using a glitch where you go back to the menu and then back into the game again, to other fun ones like just being able to clip through a door, there was a lot of really cool things that came out of Halo Infinite. It's just a shame that a lot of these aren't viable nowadays. For now, it's just in this weird state. Hopefully when co-op comes in, that can reinvigorate some things on the campaign side. But these are some of the most iconic speedrunning discoveries from over the years. Huge shout out to all of the speedrunners who we reached out to, who are willing to help share some insight. It always means a lot to us whenever anyone's willing to talk with us. If you're new, make sure you are subscribed. Also, check out some of the channel's links in the descriptions down below who make great speedrunning content. Also, if you're watching this far into the video, our friend Zombie343i, or whatever his name is, speedruns Halo 4, and a long time ago we made a joke about how everyone should go to his channel and comment asking him about how to do the Halo 4 Dawn skip, and to this day some of you guys are still asking him, which is hilarious. But we wanted to renew this because he says he's getting tired of people asking how to do Dawn skip, so now we need everyone to go and ask him either why his name is Zombie, or you should ask him when he's going to change his name to Rocket John, just because that'd be funny. Okay, that's it. That's all for the people who are still watching this far into the video. You can go on and watch one of our other videos or something.